So I have a fresh new Illustrator document open and we're ready to play around with logo balance, but also work out what typography we're going to use. But first, one thing that kind of helps me out is start to incorporate grids and to help me find this balance. So I'm just going to do my shortcut. I'm going to be doing this a lot. I'm going to be doing my command and quote and go ahead and do my shortcut. And what I like to do is I like to kind of use these boxes to kind of line this up so there's some kind of order here. And I notice don't feel like it has to stretch all the way perfectly around the box. Not every logo mark is going to do that, but at least it gives you kind of a point where you have a bottom and a top kind of aligned, and you have this little bit of extra on the end, and it's a very similar space here. So just this is going to be for overall layout of the logo. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off for now, just doing my shortcut, and let's figure out the right typography for this. So let's go ahead and spell it out. I like to do it in separate text boxes and get a good idea for size. This is just the default Myriad font, and we can find a decent placement. So I'm going to find the right typeface first because certain typefaces stretch out longer than others and it's going to mess up our balance. So let's find the typeface first, and then we can start to incorporate that in terms of sizing. So type choices. I have a really cool guide. It's a font pairing guide. It's a downloadable resource. You can check it out. Kind of gives you some font pairing choices that I like. Of course, there's hundreds of different ones that look great. It's really up to you, but just some I've used in the past, like pairing a sans serif typeface with a serif, and just kind of some no-nos of kind of you never want to put two very similar logo types or typefaces together, because then they're not differentiated enough. And I think that's the key to font pairing, is finding differentiation and contrast between your words so they can be read as separate words. So Pacific and then calm can be a little bit different or treated a little bit different, and we can play around with that idea. So I'm going to go with a kind of very standard, very skinny Railway Regular. So this is Railway Regular. It's a sans serif typeface, and we can be consistent. And if we're going to do all lowercase, let's make sure everything is consistent with lowercase. And so this is when we really are going to be copying and pasting and creating lots of different iterations. So this is when it gets a little fun and a little messy. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to end up having 20 or 30 of these things to kind of see what typeface is really starting to match with the icon. We have a very simple flat design. There's not a lot of detail. There's not any drop shadows. So we want to kind of pick a typeface that's going to emulate that. That's going to be very simple. And I wouldn't even mind a thicker typeface either, because we have this nice, kind of some pretty nice thick lines here with our wave. You know, there's some big solid areas. So I wouldn't mind a big chunky typeface, or one that's a lot thicker in its weight. So let's do Option, and let's do this. We're just going to hold down Option, and we're going to go a little crazy here. Okay, so we can figure out different arrangements. We can have one where it goes all the way across in one line, and we can also try it with caps, and then we can keep going and we could try it with all caps. So you can simply do that by going to Character, going down to our little drop down menu, and I'm just going to click on all caps there. It's kind of a quick way to do it. We can even take this and do all caps and do a stacked. This is called a stacked version. They stacked on top of each other. And we can even go further with that. And we could do wide spacing. And we'll do kerning a little bit later. So we want to have some wide tracking or spacing between the characters. Let's try that. So we're going to do a generic kind of number. We can always fine tune that later, and we can see if that works. We can even try a horizontal arrangement and copy, kind of see how messy and quick this process is. We can close the gaps between that one. We could even make that a script typeface or some other typeface. But we're going to do font pairing a little bit later, so getting ahead of myself. We can close the spacing again to 0. We can even find a kind of a thicker typeface. So you can already see we're starting to come up with some ideas here. Let's kind of fine-tune some fonts. I think the arrangements are really good. Let's do a couple more using this thicker arrangement. We can even put a line here, kind of a dividing line. It helps divide the logo mark and the logo type just a little bit. And it could also add a level, like a little bit too much busyness there. It really depends. It depends on how simple the logo type is and if it needs some kind of separation from the logo mark. Sometimes it can work really well in some cases, but I always like to have an option where I'm trying it out. Maybe have a center alignment here. Let's kind of put some really, really wide spacing here. Let's do a really dramatic 1200 point spacing between the characters. And maybe make that a thinner typeface, just like that. Just kind of checking some stuff out, seeing what looks good. Trying to see if lowercase looks good or if an all caps, all capital looks good. I think we can maybe do something different with this arrangement. Maybe we can make, and I'm keeping with the same typeface because I'm really playing with the idea of thickness and position. I'm not so much changing up the typeface because I'm just kind of getting an idea of overall type layout and whether it's going to be caps or all caps. So I think we're getting some really good options here, lots of different combinations. And this is when I like to go in, and I've already spent maybe 5 minutes after I recorded the last section and just kind of messed around with a little bit of thickness and trying out some different combinations. So with down here, you can kind of see, so you notice this one right here. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of weight of type and contrast between different words. So right now there's the same exact contrast between Pacific and Calm. They're both bold, they're both in the same weight, they both have the same spacing between the characters, and it tends to kind of lose something. There's not a whole lot of characteristic to it. But as soon as we maybe change the contrast a little bit of one of these, so in this case, we can make it a lighter weight and maybe make it a little bit smaller and add a little bit of spacing. You start to see a lot of contrast between the two, and it starts to kind of pique your interest a little bit more. So see how that looks a little bit better, how that has that little bit of contrast. So you don't have to do contrast every time you have two words. It's not necessary. I notice a lot of time if you have this arrangement, let's go ahead and type this out. A lot of people do this with logos where they'll have it together as one word. Then contrast is very, very helpful when they do something like this. So notice how that contrast works really well to divide the words without actually having to have a space between them. So that can be helpful in some cases. So now let's take a look, now that we have some really good contrast between all of these different ones, some really good arrangements. I notice I have kind of a right alignment. Actually looks really good because you have this kind of flow from the right to the left, and then you kind of have that flow moving to the left for the wave, and you have this nice strong anchor where you have this right alignment. And I think that looks really nice just because it kind of pairs well with the iconography. And looking at some of these, this has the really nice contrast. This is so far as I think one of the stronger ones because it's really, really readable. When you put this wide spacing between uppercase letters, it can look really elegant, but also makes the word kind of go further distance, and it kind of helps bring more attention to the lettering and the company name, which is very, very vital to have that attention focused on the name, especially with the brand that's new and needs to get some brand representation and some acknowledgement. It's really good to get that name out there, so that's why I put the wider spacing. Another thing, I know a lot of students do this, they love to use wide spacing with lowercase lettering, and that is, let's do the same spacing we had before, and it could work in some cases. Especially with the thicker the typeface, the better it works. But I noticed that all caps look a little bit more elegant, a little bit more mature. They're stronger. So you have a stronger character that goes all the way to the top of the cap height in typography, and it just works really, really well. So now that I have a chance to kind of look at all the options that I have in terms of lowercase and uppercase, I'm definitely feeling a draw toward the all caps as opposed to having the all lowercase here. I think it looks a lot stronger. I think it really brings a lot of emphasis to the name. And I know there's several instances where using lowercase letters brings a softness to the logo. And when you think about Pacific Calm, it makes a lot of sense to have some lowercase since lowercase are perceived as more gentle and soft. But I think in this case, the uppercase is starting to work really well, but we're still not going to close the door to using lowercase if we need to, because this one could be a really good strong contender as well. So I'm keeping all my options open, and this is where when you do client presentation, like we did with the last logo, and you're submitting ideas, this is where when you kind of help the client out by picking out what you think works best for the client. And so picking maybe 3 of these different options. They may want to go with lowercase, you want to go with uppercase. It's always good to provide them with some variations to take a look at, especially when you get down to that final concept. So when we did the coffee logo, we had 3 different concepts. We narrowed it down. At this point in this logo design, we've already established the concept of the wave, had that approved, and now we're trying to get that final logo concept approved. So we really get to explore typography in way more detail now that we don't have several concepts. We just have this one wave concept where we can really focus on it.